First of all, I know I said I would not mention religion unless the subject calls for it, and it calls for it here. Easter is the day many in the Christian religion's spectrum of theology celebrate the rising of Jesus Christ from the tomb and of full resurrection. It's far more than a sneaky rabbit planting chocolate eggs in a hidden spot. But what's the real source behind this holiday? Why do so many still celebrate this when so many still want to scoff at the idea? What's the importance of this holiday? I'm not going to go into deep religious beliefs here. I acknowledge there are many who already know the story and many who have their own ideas behind it. I will even acknowledge that there are some who don't believe the basis of this story, so grab yourself an Easter treat, sit back, relax, and let's get started. I hope you can forgive me since I'll be talking about events in the New Testament as if it actually happened, but it's important to the point I'm trying to make. Even though it's become a holiday of eggs and rabbits and sweet-toothed children, the religious undertones can still be seen and felt, which makes it difficult to avoid. I know not everyone will watch this video past this point, and I appreciate that you might not believe the same that I do. I just ask that you be kind in the comments while I try and explain things. Given the general information we have about the time of the Christian holiday's beginning, we can guess about what time of year it was. By studying the text of the New Testament, it's clear that it was around the time of the Jewish holiday of Passover. Even today, Jews celebrate the deliverance of their ancestors and predecessors from Egyptian slavery. I know there are those who would scoff at this, saying there's no proof, but I'm not here to convince you of that. It's just to note the time of year this happened. But during the spread of Catholicism across Europe, they found many pagans celebrated the spring equinox, the time when daylight comes longer than nighttime. It wasn't too long or too big a stretch as the Christian religion began to adopt pagan holidays as their own. This is, after all, how Saturnalia became Christmas and how the Feast of Samhain became known as Halloween. Easter is an adoption of the Feast of the Equinox, since it seems to work, i.e. the return of life to the earth like the return of life to Jesus Christ. But does this mean that it's all bogus? I can honestly say I won't say. But I do hope you take a few things into consideration. Now I will try and explain something very deep. The leadership of the Jewish nation at the time, if we are to accept the story as genuine, were basically so fanatically devoted to the law of Moses that they literally made rules after rules so that they wouldn't accidentally break the law of Moses. These strict adherents, known as Pharisees, often went out of their way to accuse Jesus of breaking the law. If you know what's going on and why, it becomes clear. But what really alarmed them wasn't the miraculous powers reported to them about this Jesus of Nazareth. It was the fact that more and more people were flocking to him. As I've studied it, it became apparent that the charge, blasphemy, was basically an excuse. They didn't want to lose their power, and they feared their Roman masters coming down on them. They had it happen before, because the Roman governor was known to make bold strides, although he often flinched. And what's more, blasphemy was punishable by death, but they couldn't kill him. It's the fact that, at the time, they had to get permission to execute him from their Roman masters, which is why, the next day, the charges were changed from blasphemy to sedition. They changed the accusation that way in order to make it seem like Jesus and his followers were going to rise up against Rome. I won't go into too much detail in regards to the trials recorded. They are the subject of many works based on the record that tells us pretty much all we need to know. What I found is that the first trial, the trial before the Sanhedrin, the leading Jewish body, was illegal since they could not do any trials by night, nor could they convict if there were any dissenters. They met at night, and there were two who refused to convict Jesus because they believed he was what he said he was. Yet the next day, they took him to Pontius Pilate, accusing him of sedition. Now here's something about Pilate. There had been a few incidents when he tried to push Roman ideals onto the stubborn Jewish people. They challenged him and he backed down. I won't go into details. So when he had someone who probably looked worn out in front of him being accused of trying to overthrow Rome, he went into the usual line of questions. Eventually, he decided Jesus held no threat to Rome and tried to talk the Jewish people out of it. There were a few incidents, including the release of prisoners at Passover. What's ever mentioned is that the man called Barabbas had a first name. It's probably never mentioned in the Gospels because that man, a true threat and a known criminal, had the name of Jesus as well. So, why did Pilate keep going? Why did he have Jesus scourged? The answer may surprise you. For some reason, there are many who would consign what is said happened to Jesus as something unusual for his case only. Indeed, if people who believed he was the one who suffered so they might live, it would seem appropriate. First, though, is the washing of the hands. It was actually a custom in Jewish law to have someone do this in order to signify the person whose hands are washed holds no responsibility for what happens. This is not done often, but the leaders who were there understood what Pilate was saying. Whatever happened, it was on their heads, not on hands. But when we get to the scourging, here's what gets interesting, because any who were sentenced to crucifixion were often subjected to a scourging ahead of time, and they were made a mockery of by the Romans who did this. So the so-called King of the Jews had a crown of sharp thorns made as they bared his back and took a whip that had shards of metal and stone and even bone in a multi-tailed whip. It is not anything special, except for those who believe the person who suffered this was something more than a man. Scourging, you see, often preceded the actual act of crucifixion, as the condemned would often die from the sheer brutality of it. Now, although Pilate often bared scorn, I have to give him props since he did try to save Jesus from the cruelty of crucifixion, but the mob had their minds set. Now, I have to take in the idea that Jesus alone carried this massive cross through the streets of Jerusalem as if it were his burden alone. If you study it carefully, it becomes obvious that it was common for any condemned to do this as capital punishment, carrying the crossbeam only, and they all did. When Jesus couldn't carry it, obviously because he was exhausted, they picked a random person to carry it for him, and they made their way to Golgotha. And now for the true cruelty. It wasn't just for Jesus alone to have the nails driven into his hands and arms. The Romans had gained experience in how to deal the most pain in order to really make this experience something others would not want. Just imagine it. Spread your arms wide, as far out as they can go, and as straight as possible. Now hold that pose for 20 minutes. Go ahead, hit pause. I'll wait. So how did he do? The nail for the feet was so that there'd be some sort of brace, which would alleviate some of the agony that was far more than 20 minutes, and it was impossible for them to put their arms down. As for the breaking of the legs, these same people who were up in arms about seeing Jesus crucified came to Pilate and complained it would be a serious offense if the 3 crucified people were up there on the cross once the nighttime came. And it really would have been. By this time, they had been on the cross for a few hours, and their organs had suffered. The sudden breaking of their legs pretty much did the 2 thieves in, but then comes the blood and water. It is recorded that a Roman pierced the side of Jesus with a spear, and that blood and water poured out. This has been proven to be an actual medical condition, the rupturing of a heart. It is likely the centurion had seen this kind of thing before and had known that is what killed Jesus. But how much pressure must a heart endure before it rips? It's a given that Jesus probably was very fit. He lived in a hilly country and walked most places, and he must have done a lot of physical work, as his diet was pretty healthy, with herbs and fish being the majority of it. and it takes an awful lot of stress to get the muscles of the heart to tear open. By and large, it is the strongest, most used muscle in the body. And Jesus had only been on the cross for a few hours, not long enough to have this happen. But then we get into the event that adopted Easter. Now first, I have to correct a long-standing belief. Resurrection means the changing from one state to another, the changing of a lower sort to a higher. This is why, even though there are 3 clear cases where Jesus allegedly brought the dead back to life, these cases are not called resurrection in the New Testament. But for some reason, it got equal to the restoration of life after a while. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, except to say that if we believe the words that are written as an actual record of events that happened, it shows a clear different state that Jesus was in when he rose. Now, I have tried to be fair here, sharing only those things that can be studied and thought about and through, and not try to give it a religious overtone. I hope I have succeeded and that this video is fair to all who listen, but we must ask one final question. What is the celebration of Easter really about? There are many that tell of what I recorded above as their personal beliefs, and they're free to believe it. There are also many who would scoff at those and ignore the religious aspects, calling it a pagan holiday and telling those who believe in the concept of Christianity they are deluded. These people are free to believe as they do as well, but I will not have any attack against either side in the comments below, so consider yourself warned. So what is Easter? It's a celebration of life, sure, since it is close to the time when spring returns, but it's more than that. To those that are willing to listen, it becomes something greater, something of an invitation to do much better. How many would see someone in trouble or just having a bad day and try to boost them up? How many would ensure that people could eat when they had nothing? What can make things better all over the earth? In a world that is becoming more and more paranoid, as well as more and more interested in self, what is really needed is that when we pass from this little life on earth, there is great hope for something much, much better. So this Easter, I would ask only that you think a little bit more of the person you know is having a hard time. I would ask you to think of others and to extend a hand in help. I would ask that you give the world a little bit of hope.